Next up on the broadcast, Senator Cam Ward of Alabaster is back in studio with us. Senator, welcome back to Capitol Journal.
Thanks for having me back.
Always nice to see you.
Too.
Senator, let's begin with prisons. I know it's top of mind for you, given your background in prison reform. I'll remind viewers that you are chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. You have led the Joint Legislative Task Force on prison reform, among other initiatives. We're moving toward a special legislative session on the issue of prison problems in Alabama, but we seem to be in a position now where it's not going to be maybe this year. It might wait until next year. Is that what you're hearing now?
Yeah, well, we're working on it. Let's get the data right. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's go all in. Everybody focuses on let's pass something to fix it. But the data that we need comes from the Sentencing Commission, and they've really worked hard on this. However, it's going to take them probably till late September to come up with the data we need on what sentencing changes we need to make this work right. So I think realistically, you're talking about the first of the year. And Department of Justice, they're okay with that. They know we're trying to work on it. They know we're trying to fix it. So I think let's take our time, let's get this right. But yeah, you have a special session, but let's do it in 2020.
Well, the big issue is, of course, the Department of Justice, given the report that they issued early this year, which pointed out very serious problems in our prison system, and the worry that they might either sue us or step in, and tell us what they want us to do. But you are assured that they have assurances that we're moving in the right direction?
I feel good. I feel like we're in a good spot. We're making progress. We're showing that we're making progress. And that's what they really want to see. But let's get it right. Let's don't sit around and pass something for the sake of passing a bill. Let's pass something that works. Let's get all the stakeholders together. Let's take our time and do it. We're doing that now, but I think it's going to take probably into early next year to get it done right.
You mentioned sentencing reform. Is that going to be probably one of the biggest tasks in this effort?
Yes. I mean, everybody talks about construction. Construction's probably about 25% of the whole deal. Construction improves the conditions to comply with the court order, but realistically, you've got to have sentencing reform to really comply with what DOJ and the courts want, and that's the biggest haul, and that's kind of why we're waiting so long to do all this.
Sentencing reform, among other things, would help with the overcrowding issue, would it not?
It does, and what you want to avoid is a federal takeover where they do a mass release. We have to reduce our population, but let's do it over a period of 4 or 5 years, and we can do that, as opposed to what the feds will do. The feds, they take over, they're going to do a mass release. So let's figure out how to reduce our population, do it over a period of time in a smart way that doesn't harm public safety.
We have made some strides in sentencing reform over the last decade, have we not? But we need to make more.
We have. We've gone from about 198% capacity. We're down to 155% capacity. We probably need to get around 137% capacity according to the courts. We can get there. We can do that. But let's take the time to do it the right way so it doesn't harm public safety.
Now, the general public, when they hear us talk about sentencing reform, may think it means certain things when it doesn't. We're just talking about making crimes fit the sentences, or the sentences fit the crimes more appropriately.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. What we're trying to avoid is when the federal courts take over your system, which they're threatening to do, they can come in and release whoever they want to release without any say from our states. Our state officials, and that's a dangerous thing. So what we're trying to do is make sure if we're going to decrease our population, let's do it in a way that's sound and safe for public safety, but also in a way that avoids a mass release that the feds want to do. So yeah, people, when the general public hears this, they get concerned about, well, is this going to mean a bunch of dangerous people on the streets? That's what we want to avoid, and that's what we're trying to get to.
There were some efforts this year in that vein. It concerned lessening the penalties for marijuana possession, among other things. Are those the types of things we need to look at?
We can talk about that. Actually, on marijuana, the big issue there is you almost have no one in prison today solely for marijuana charges. That's a myth. That's primarily a county jail issue. On state prisons, what you have to deal with are property crimes. And no one likes to talk about reducing sentences for property crimes, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to, the federal courts will take you over.
When we say property crimes, can you elaborate for the folks what we talk about?
Good example, somebody breaks into my tool shed and steals my weed eater, and that gets them a 20-year sentence. Is that really the same as someone who committed murder who gets, they're paroled after 6 or 7 years? It shouldn't be the same.
Governor Ivey said a while back that she hoped that legislative work groups would be meeting over the summer and leading up to when legislators come back next year on some of these issues. Are you optimistic that a lot of the legwork can get done in the meantime?
We're doing that now. We've been meeting since February. A lot of us have been. And we have meetings over the summer. She's going to probably announce a working group coming up as well that's going to be working together. I think we're going to get there, but take the time to do it right. Don't rush it. Don't pass a bunch of bills that sound good, but that do nothing to solve the problem. So yeah, I think we have a good group working now.
Now, the report that the DOJ issued this year really focused in on two key areas, problems as they saw it: inmate-on-inmate violence, and inmate-on-inmate sexual assault behind bars. Both of these are seen widely as outgrowths of our overcrowding issue. Sentencing reform would go a long way, would it not, in combating some of those overcrowding problems and solving some of these very issues, the violence and the sexual assaults.
It would. And also, I think part of this package of bills to improve the system would be making sure you have more reporting requirements. Used to, under the current system, you have to go sue to get data regarding sexual assaults, regarding suicide rates. You shouldn't have to do that. That should be reported every month to the legislature. You should also have penalties in place if you sexually assault an inmate, if you're an officer and you sexually assault someone, or you engage in sexual conduct. If there's a suicide rate, we should know about it so we can fix it better. Right now they don't do that. I think that'd be a big part of the process.
By proxy, would sentencing reform, among other things, also help address things like murder behind bars or
it should.
Assaults behind bars?
As it should. If you assault someone behind bars, or if you help someone commit suicide behind bars, that should be a penalty. There should be fines. There should be criminal penalties in place for that. You have to address that as well. It's not just one bill or just one issue. It's not just sentencing guidelines. It's also the conditions. It's also how you handle those sexual assaults, how you handle those suicide rates. It's a comprehensive package is how you deal with it.
We've also heard stories that have been reported often in this debate about family members at home getting blackmail calls saying, if you don't send me money, I'm going to rape your son, or that sort of thing.
Technology exists now that we should block cell phones from being in prisons. But daily, I get them all the time myself. I get people who call me or text me or email me from prison.
Really?
From illegal cell phones. Oh, all the time.
What do they say to you?
Oh, well, I want this. I want you guys to help me with this. Why aren't you doing this? And it's illegal devices. Technology exists now to stop that. We need to put legislation in place that stops that, keeps that from happening, because it's illegal. And what you're seeing is drug dealers use that as a way to continue their drug trade from inside the prison walls.
This contraband problem, as it was, because cell phones are definitely part of the contraband problem behind bars. Are they not? Are also an outgrowth of the overcrowding, right?
They're an
and the understaffing.
Yes, they're an outgrowth of the overcrowding. They're also an outgrowth of lack of officers in place. We need to hire more officers. We started doing that last session and again this session, but we've got to continue hiring more officers to make sure we have qualified people in place to stop that from happening.
I think it's been said that we probably need to hire 2,000 additional corrections officers.
That's correct, yeah.
The legislature this year approved a bill that would hire 500, so we're going to have to approach this incrementally, right?
Yeah, that's correct. You can't do it all at once, and there's no way you could hire that many people at once. But I think by 2022, and I think they've talked to Judge Thompson about this, we could hire 2,000 more officers. And getting to that goal would solve a huge part of the contraband problem.
Also, making these jobs more attractive to folks has also been a concern. The package I mentioned that was passed by the legislature this year also approved a pay raise for correctional officers.
Correct.
We've got to be more competitive in hiring for these positions, do we not?
Yeah, myself and Representative Chris England, we passed that bill to raise the pay for officers incoming. Yeah, you've got to make it competitive. You realize they're law enforcement just like a sheriff or a city police officer, but they're the lowest paid law enforcement officers in the state. What do you do to make that better? And I think the bill we passed will do that for them. And I think it makes it more attractive because they're in the most dangerous circumstances of anybody else in the state.
Has that also been a deterrent in hiring these officers? The fact that we have this behind the bars violence problem?
If I'm getting paid less, but I'm working in a more violent circumstance, why would you take that job? And I don't blame them. They do great work, but they need to be paid more to attract not only retention, but also attracting more officers.
I don't know if you can answer this, but there are some who also say that some correctional officers are part of the problem where contraband is concerned.
Oh, sure.
That they're aiding and abetting inmates getting this contraband behind bars.
Yeah, and you know what though? Anytime you have that many people, you're always going to have bad apples. It always happens. I mean, whether it's the legislature, whether it's a city council, whether it's any large group of people, you're going to have bad apples that stain the rest of them. But for the most part, you have some really hard-working officials in DOC. They really want to do a good job, but they're underpaid, understaffed, and overworked. So address that, and I think you'll weed out a lot of your bad apples.
The issues that get reported about our prisons problems now really paint a dangerous picture of what it's like to be in prison in Alabama, a deadly situation.
Well, yesterday I did a question and answer session with inmates and officers at Donaldson Prison. I had a great day. It was a good, informative discussion. But yeah, it's dangerous, it's scary, but also there are solutions. We can get there. We can fix this. We just can't be scared of being unpopular or politically incorrect in doing it. We've got to do it the right way. And I think there are solutions. And listening yesterday to those officers and inmates, there's a way to get there.
You know, when we talk about our prison problems, it's also often pointed out that it's not the sexiest subject to talk about with your constituents back home, you know, more money for prisons and that sort of thing. But we're in a position now where we've got to do something.
Yeah, and you know, it's not sexy. And no one wants to sit around and talk about prisons. It doesn't get you votes back home. But at the end of the day, Don, shouldn't we be more concerned about fixing it, getting it right, and forget about the election part? And that's where I come from. I mean, we've got to fix this. We know it's a problem. Everyone who says it's not, they're like an ostrich putting their head in the ground. Fix the problem. Yeah, it's going to be a problem, but it's one we can address if we don't kick the can down the road. If we kick the can down the road, what's going to happen is more taxes, more money, more inmates being released if we don't fix it ourselves.
You mentioned earlier the suicide problem behind bars. That's part of the overall mental health debate which continues around our prisons. Of course, we're continuing to be involved in litigation over mental health care for prisoners in Alabama. Are we making strides, do you think, in that area?
We are. I think DOC is making strides, and I think the courts have recognized that. We have to, however, do more to, we've got to fund it. It's not free. When you have mental health issues, when you have a lack of health care, nobody in Alabama wants to pay for that, but under the 8th Amendment, we don't have a choice, we have to. And if we try to deny that, then that's going to require us to spend a whole lot more money when we do deny it. So we're making strides, we're getting there, but we have a whole lot more work to do.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that new construction is not the only part of this conversation, but it is a part. And we're moving in that direction. Governor Ivey has put out calls for qualifications from developers interested in building new prisons in the state. Do you like the plan as it's moving forward?
I do like the plan, I do. The only question I would ever have, I think the plan's good. I think what they're trying to do is right. I think it solves part of the problem, I do. The only question I would say is don't try to build your way out of this problem. If you try to build your way out of this issue, we'll go back to what Alabama did in the early 1980s, and that was we were putting receivership for our prisons, and we said, well, you know what, we'll just build our way out. And here we are 20 years later. Let's build these prisons in a way that deals with the 8th Amendment issue, deals with the court rulings, let's deal with the conditions, but let's also fix it in another way on sentencing that solves us on the overcrowding problem, so that in 20 years I don't leave my predecessor or whoever else is out there, the taxpayer, with dealing with this problem that's going to be a lot more expensive.
The plan that's moving forward now involves building 3 new men's prisons.
Yeah.
There are those who say we also need to build a new women's prison. Your colleague, Representative Chris England of Tuscaloosa,
I agree
among
with Chris.
them.
Yeah, I agree with Chris on that. I think we should. I think that should be part of the equation. That's what really started prison reform discussions in 2014 was Tutwiler and the issues going on there. We should. It was built during a World War II era. They're not designed to handle modern day population. So yeah, we should look at that.
New prisons also, it's been pointed to by those who support the plan, would help solve some of our security issues that could be equipped with modern technology to help monitor security better.
Well, you have buildings that were wired in the 1940s, and with 21st century technology, you can't put cameras or video machines in place that would monitor the current crime or internal crime rates. So why would you not want to modernize that to make it a more efficient facility?
The plan that's being put forward now would involve a private lease agreement. The state would contract with a developer to build these prisons to state specifications, and then that developer would lease these facilities back to the state. That avoids legislative approval, which has been a stumbling block in recent years. Lawmakers have turned away efforts to build new prisons. Do you think this is the way to go? Are you concerned at all that legislators wouldn't have a vote on the construction?
No, you're always going to have oversight. So as long as it doesn't increase the budget line item, then why would you be opposed to it? It's a smart way to do it. It's a more efficient way of doing it. I think the Ivey administration is right in doing it this way. I do think, though, the legislature should exercise its oversight as far as the budget goes. And I think conversations are underway where we'll have that ability to do that. But I think it's a good way to go. I think she's doing it the right way.
The price tag is estimated to be about $900 million.
Without an increase at all to the general fund budget. So if you're not going to increase the budget amount, that's a much better way than the legislature issuing a bond issue. A bond issue for $900 million would be us going into debt and having to pay that back. Without having to go into debt, I think it's a smart way to do it.
Explain briefly for our viewers how we could accomplish that, how we could spend $900 million in new prisons and not add to the general fund.
This is why her plan is the best way to go. What you're doing is you build 3 new prisons. You have roughly 18 men prison now, and you have 1 female. You would close almost all those prisons, and the savings you get from operating those would pay for the lease to those new prisons. So it's a much more efficient way of doing it.
Because she wants to build, Governor Ivey does, 3 new regional men's prisons,
Correct.
Which would consolidate all of these 18 current men's prisons into 3 new mega facilities.
And they do that in several states, and it works better. The public safety issue's better. It's cheaper to do it that way. The way you pay for the leases are better. We would still run and operate it. It wouldn't be private prisons. We would run and operate it. We would just lease it, very similar to renting an apartment. We would do the same thing.
Final analysis before we close. You said at the outset, and I'll ask you again, are the feds encouraged and satisfied with the direction we're moving?
I think they are. We've made progress, and we're showing that we're serious about trying to solve this. What their biggest concern is, are we trying to shirk our responsibilities or just turn a blind eye to it? We haven't. They know we're working on it. They know we're having meetings. They've been included in several of those meetings, so I think we're in good shape.
And the special session to deal with this, if it comes about, would probably be early next year?
Well, it's totally up to the governor. The governor makes that call. I would suggest early next year, because let's get the data in place. If we're going to do a bill on sentencing reform, prison construction, let's make sure we have the data in place that shows what's going to work and what's not. Don't pass something for the sake of saying I did something. In 3 years, we got to come back and fix it.
Senator Cam Ward of Alabaster, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for your leadership.